I am Santa Claus, the man behind the magic of Christmas, the harbinger of cheer, laughter, and the sweet innocence of a child's wish. For as long as I can remember, this role has defined me. When I don the red suit and stroke my snowy beard, I become a figure larger than life, a symbol of warmth and joy. Parents smile at me with a knowing nod. Their children gaze with wonder, and for a moment, the world feels lighter, brighter. But beneath the layers of tradition and merriment lies a truth few know. My life, like the season I embody, is laced with bittersweetness. Beneath the jingle of bells and the laughter of children, there is a silence, a void carved into my soul by an ache I've carried for 2 decades. It's the ache of a father who has lost his child. Her name was Clara, my Clara. 20 years ago, she was my joy, my reason for everything. Bright-eyed and curious, she had a spark that lit up every room she entered. She was the kind of young woman who noticed the unnoticed, who loved fiercely and deeply. I remember the way she used to sit beside me as I prepared for my Christmas rounds, asking endless questions about my route, the children I'd visit, and the magic of the season. Her laughter was the music of my life. Then, one cold December evening, she vanished. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. It was as if the universe had simply snatched her away, leaving nothing but her absence in her place. I can still recall the night vividly, the stillness in the house when I called her name, the gnawing dread that tightened around my chest when there was no answer. The hours turned into days, the days into months, and the months into years, but the pain remained as sharp as ever. What haunts me most is what she left behind, her memories scattered like snowflakes in the wind, and the golden sapphire ring I had given her on her 18th birthday. She had worn it every day, twisting it on her finger as she dreamed aloud about her future. "It's like a piece of a stars, Dad," she had said, her voice full of wonder as she slipped it onto her finger for the first time. The way her eyes sparkled that day is a memory I've clung to, even as the years have worn me thin. The ring she wore is no longer in my possession, but I carry its twin, a replica I had made to keep her close, even in her absence. I wear it now on my pinky finger, a constant reminder of her light and the void it left behind. Each time I glance at it, I am reminded of the promise I made to myself the day she disappeared. I will never stop searching. Every year, as the Christmas season arrives, my longing for her sharpens. The holiday's magic, meant to bring families together, only deepens the sense of her absence. Yet, amid the sorrow, hope persists. There's something about Christmas, the glimmer of lights, the crispness in the air, the whispers of possibility, that keeps me from despair. Perhaps, I think, this will be the year I finally find her. As I look out over the bustling mall filled with families hurrying to and fro, I force a smile and adjust my gloves. Children line up, their wide eyes brimming with excitement as they wait to share their dreams with Santa. The laughter of the season fills the air, but within me, there is a quiet resolve. Somewhere out there, Clara exists. Somewhere, she might still be waiting for me as I've waited for her. Christmas has always been a time for miracles, and though I've spent 20 years without one, I haven't given up. Deep in my heart, I know the season's magic has a way of working in mysterious, wondrous ways. It was another busy December afternoon, the kind of day that blurred together in the endless tide of Christmas cheer. The mall was alive with the hum of shoppers. Lights twinkled from every corner, and garlands hung from the railings like festive guardians of the season. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon, mingling with the occasional jingles of distant carolers. I sat in my usual spot, a grand wooden throne draped in plush red velvet, surrounded by glittering fake snow and an arch of golden lights. The line of children stretched long, their eager faces full of wonder. Some fidgeted nervously, clutching their parents' hands, while others couldn't wait to run up and spill their wishes. I listened to them with my usual enthusiasm, nodding gravely at requests for puppies, dolls, and bicycles. Each interaction was a moment of pure innocence, a reminder of what Christmas was meant to be. Yet, as always, my thoughts lingered elsewhere, on Clara. It was during a quiet lull between visitors that I first noticed her. She was walking toward me from across the atrium, her figure wrapped in a long, dark coat, a knitted scarf trailing loosely from her shoulders. A small child rested on her hip, their round face rosy from the cold. Her hair fell in loose waves, framing her face, and though her features were unfamiliar, there was something about her that struck me, a subtle grace, a quiet confidence. As she drew closer, I saw her pull off her glove with practiced ease. And that's when I saw it, the ring. My breath caught in my throat. It was unmistakable. The same delicate gold band with a sapphire that shimmered like the night sky. The same ring I had given Clara all those years ago. My mind screamed at me to stay calm, to look away, but my heart betrayed me. My eyes were locked on the ring, my pulse racing as if the world had suddenly tilted off its axis. Ho, 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 Merry Christmas. I managed to bellow, though the words felt foreign on my tongue. My hand trembled as I extended it toward her, an automatic gesture of greeting. She smiled politely, adjusting the child on her hip, and took my hand. Her grip was warm, firm, yet it was the sight of that ring gleaming on her finger that sent a jolt through me. "That's a beautiful ring," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Her smile grew softer, almost wistful. "Thank you," she replied, her voice light, pleasant. "It's very special to me." The words hit me like a freight train. I could still hear Clara's voice echoing in my mind, saying the same thing on the morning of her 18th birthday. "It's so special, Dad," she'd said, her eyes bright with gratitude as she slipped the ring onto her finger. My Clara had said those words with the same quiet reverence. I swallowed hard, struggling to steady my breathing. "Special, you say? It must have quite the story." She hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly as she glanced down at the ring, twisting it absently with her thumb. "It does," she said after a moment. "It was a gift from someone very important to me. A long time ago." I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. Her words danced just on the edge of recognition, close enough to hurt, but distant enough to keep me grasping. Could it be her? No, that was impossible. This woman looked older, more weathered by life than my Clara would have been at her age. Yet the ring, and the way she spoke of it, tugged at something deep inside me. I forced myself to smile again, the corners of my mouth trembling. "You don't say. Gifts like that are rare, aren't they? Unique, even." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and assessing, as though she sensed the weight behind my casual remark. She didn't answer immediately, and in the silence, the sound of the mall around us seemed to fade. "It is unique," she finally said. "I've never seen another one like it. Neither have I." I thought, my heart thundering in my chest. The child in her arms squirmed, and she adjusted him, breaking the moment. "Well," she said with a polite smile, "thank you for making his day. He's been talking about seeing Santa all week." The boy grinned shyly at me, his small hand waving. I forced another chuckle, patting my lap. "Come, young man, let Santa hear what you'd like for Christmas this year." As the boy climbed onto my lap, I stole another glance at the woman, watching her adjust her scarf and glance absently at the crowd. The ring sparkled on her finger, a beacon of mystery. My mind raced with questions, but my years as Santa Claus had taught me the art of patience. This wasn't the time. Yet, even as I listened to the boys' excited chatter about toy trains and candy canes, my thoughts were consumed by her. Who is she? Where had she gotten that ring? And why, deep in the core of my being, did I feel like I had just found a piece of Clara? The little boy's laughter was bright, a perfect melody for the season, yet I barely heard it. My focus, my entire being, was consumed by the sight of the ring. It was the same slender gold band, the same luminous sapphire that shimmered like a drop of evening sky. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, as I fought to process the implications. I forced a smile, looking down at the boy who sat on my lap, his small hands gesturing excitedly as he told me about the shiny train set he hoped to find under the tree. His cheeks were flushed with excitement, his words tumbling over each other in a rapid, joyous stream. He was beautiful, radiant with the pure innocence of childhood, yet I couldn't give him my full attention. "Thank you, Santa," he exclaimed suddenly, hopping down from my lap. His eyes sparkled as he turned to the woman, his mother, who stood just a few feet away. "Did you hear, Mommy?" I told him about the train and the tracks and the big tunnels. The woman laughed softly, her voice warm but understated. "I'm sure Santa knows exactly what to do now," she said, adjusting the boy's scarf as she glanced at me. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought I saw something there. Curiosity, perhaps even recognition. But it was fleeting. My gaze drifted back to her hand. She wasn't wearing gloves now, and the ring was clearly visible, as if fate itself wanted to taunt me with its presence. "That's quite a beautiful ring," I said, my voice calm, almost casual, though my heart was pounding violently in my chest. She looked down at her hand, as if noticing the ring for the first time. Her fingers brushed over it absently, the movement almost protective. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's very special to me." Those words. The exact words Clara had used the day I gave her the ring. My Clara, standing in the glow of the Christmas tree, her smile wide, her fingers trembling as she turned the ring in the light. "It's so special, Dad," she'd said. "I'll never take it off." The memory hit me like a sudden gust of icy wind, and I struggled to keep my composure. "Special, indeed," I said, keeping my voice light. "May I ask where you got it?" Her expression shifted slightly, a shadow of hesitation crossing her face. Her hand dropped from the ring, but I noticed how she tucked it closer to her body, as if shielding it. "It was a gift," she said simply. "A gift," I prompted, leaning forward slightly. "It must be a wonderful story if it's that special." Her lips pressed together, and she glanced away, her gaze sweeping the bustling mall as though searching for an escape. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost cautious. "It was given to me a long time ago, by someone important." The ambiguity of her words sent a chill down my spine. Someone important. The phrase seemed to linger in the air, heavy with possibilities. My mind raced. Could she know Clara? Could she be Clara? No, that was impossible. This woman was younger than Clara would be now. But still, there was something hauntingly familiar about her. "It's a beautiful heirloom," I said carefully, testing the waters. "I've only ever seen one like it before." Her eyes snapped back to mine, narrowing slightly. There was something wary in her gaze now, a subtle shift in the way she held herself. "I've never seen another one like it either," she said, her tone sharper, guarded. The boy tugged at her coat, oblivious to the tension between us. "Mommy, can we go see the big Christmas tree now?" Her posture softened immediately as she looked down at him, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "Of course, sweetheart." She bent to adjust his scarf again, smoothing it over his small shoulders. But before she turned to leave, she met my gaze one last time. Her eyes lingered on mine for a heartbeat too long, as if she were searching for something, though I couldn't tell if she found it. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've made his day." I nodded, though my voice caught in my throat. "Merry Christmas," I managed. She turned and walked away, the boy skipping alongside her, his small hand clutching hers tightly. I watched them until they disappeared into the crowd, the ring still glinting on her finger like a star in the distance. I sat there, rooted to my chair, the cheerful buzz of the mall fading into a dull hum around me. My thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and hope. That ring was no coincidence. It couldn't be. And yet, how could it have ended up with her? Who was she? She wasn't Clara. I knew that much. But maybe, just maybe, she could lead me to her. The possibility sent a shiver through me, one laced with fear and anticipation. My heart told me this was no mere chance encounter. The ring was a sign, And if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that Christmas is a season of signs. I just needed to follow where this one might lead. The hours that followed passed in a haze. I remained seated on my throne, surrounded by the festive chaos of them all, yet my mind was far from the hum of holiday cheer. The woman with the sapphire ring haunted my thoughts, her image etched in my mind like a painting I couldn't stop analyzing. Her voice, her mannerisms, the subtle way her fingers brushed over the ring, it all lingered, gnawing at the edges of my composure. Children came and went, their laughter and whispered wishes filling the space around me. Normally, their joy would lift my spirits, but today, I struggled to keep my focus. I smiled and nodded, offering hearty ho-ho-hos, but my heart wasn't in it. My eyes kept drifting to the crowd, scanning for a glimpse of her dark coat or the glint of that ring. Who was she? How had she come to possess something so personal, so sacred? My Clara had been wearing that ring the day she disappeared. Of that, I was certain. I could still see her as she twirled it on her finger, her smile soft and contemplative. "It's like carrying a piece of the stars," she had said. And now, 20 years later, it had reappeared on the hand of a stranger. A deep unease settled over me, like a shadow stretching longer as the day wore on. Could be a coincidence. Could there be another ring like Clara's? The rational part of me whispered that it was possible, that I was grasping at straws, chasing ghosts. But my heart refused to listen. The timing, the details, the way that woman spoke of its significance, it all felt too perfect, too deliberate. I replayed our brief conversation over and over in my mind. "It was given to me by someone very dear," she had said, her voice tinged with something unspoken. Her hesitation, her guarded demeanor, it wasn't just the vagueness of her words that unsettled me. It was the way she had looked at me, as if she were holding back, as if there were pieces of her story she couldn't or wouldn't share. The day wore on, the line of children growing shorter as the mall's energy began to wind down. My shift was nearly over when I made up my mind. I couldn't let this go. That ring was more than a trinket, more than a coincidence. It was a thread connecting the past to the present, and if I didn't follow it, I knew I'd regret it for the rest of my life. As the last child hopped down from my lap, I rose from the throne, stretching my legs and adjusting my coat. My assistant, a cheerful young woman named Ellie, who had been helping manage the line, gave me a curious look. "Taking a break?" she asked, holding up her clipboard. "Something like that," I replied, offering her a faint smile. "I'll be back shortly." Without waiting for a response, I stepped off the platform and into the sea of shoppers. The mall was a labyrinth of lights and sound, but I moved through it with purpose, my eyes scanning every face, every figure. Minutes passed, and my determination began to waver. She was gone, I thought, lost in the crowd, carried away by the tide of holiday activity. My shoulders sagged with disappointment, but just as I was about to turn back, I saw her. She was sitting on a bench near the massive Christmas tree in the mall's central atrium. The boy sat beside her, his legs swinging as he munched on a candy cane. She held a paper cup of coffee in her gloved hands, her head tilted slightly as she watched the crowds pass by. My pulse quickened. This was my chance. I approached slowly, rehearsing what I might say. I couldn't afford to scare her away, but I also couldn't let her slip through my fingers. As I neared the bench, I forced a smile and cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady but warm. "I hope I'm not intruding." She looked up, startled at first, but her expression softened when she recognized me. "Oh, Santa," she said, offering a polite smile. "You're not working anymore?" I chuckled lightly, gesturing to the bench. "Not for the moment. May I?" She hesitated, but then nodded, shifting slightly to make room. I sat down beside her, close enough to speak softly, but far enough to respect her space. The boy glanced at me, his eyes wide with curiosity, but quickly returned his attention to the candy cane. "I hope you don't mind me saying," I began, choosing my words carefully, "but I couldn't help but notice your ring earlier. It's quite striking." Her hand twitched, and she glanced down at the ring. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw the way her shoulders tensed, the slight tightening of her jaw. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's just that it reminded me of something," I continued, my tone light but probing. "Something very dear to me." She looked at me then, her eyes sharp and searching. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Let's just say it's a rare design," I said. "I haven't seen another like it in quite some time." "Are you sure its story is as simple as you think?" Her brow furrowed, and for a moment, she seemed caught off guard. Then she glanced away, her fingers twisting the ring absently. "I don't know," she admitted. "I mean, it's special to me, but I don't know much about it. It was given to me years ago. By someone close to you?" I pressed gently. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the conflict in her expression, the way she wrestled with her thoughts. There was something she wasn't saying, something she was holding back. And though I didn't know her story yet, I felt the unmistakable pull of destiny. "I hope you don't mind me asking," I said, my voice soft but insistent. "But who gave it to you?" She hesitated, her hand falling to her lap. "It's complicated," she said finally. The answer, though vague, sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what lay beneath her words, but I knew one thing for certain. This mystery was far from over. The pause between her answer and my next question felt eternal. Her words, "It's complicated," hung in the air like a fragile ornament, threatening to shatter with the slightest pressure. I leaned back slightly, not wanting to push too hard, but feeling the urgency clawing at me like a force beyond my control. My years as Santa had taught me patience, the art of reading people, but this was different. This wasn't just curiosity. This was personal. She sat there, her fingers absently twisting the ring as if it were a talisman. Her gaze flickered down to her lap, where the boy had leaned against her, his candy cane now reduced to a sticky red and white nub. The mall's noise seemed to fade, the distant carols and chatter of shoppers melting into a dull hum. For a moment, it was just the two of us on that bench, and the weight of the unanswered questions between us. "I understand if it's a sensitive subject," I said carefully, breaking the silence. "But sometimes stories like these can connect us in ways we don't expect." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, but didn't know where to begin. Finally, she let out a small sigh and looked at me, her eyes softer now, but still guarded. "It was a gift," she said, her voice low, as though the words themselves were difficult to admit. "From someone who said they loved me, but I never really knew them." The phrasing struck me as odd. She spoke with a kind of detachment, like the memory was distant and blurred, a picture she couldn't quite bring into focus. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. "You never knew them." Her brow furrowed, and she glanced away, her fingers tightening around the ring. "I was very young," she said. "Maybe 4, 5 years old. It's hard to remember everything clearly, but I know they gave me this ring and told me to keep it safe. They said it was important, something I should always hold on to." I felt my breath catch in my throat. A wave of emotion surged within me. Hope, disbelief, and a creeping sense of dread. My fingers curled against my knees as I forced myself to remain calm. "And this person," I said carefully, "they all left after that?" Her nod was almost imperceptible. "Yes," she murmured. "I never saw them again." Her words hit me like a thunderclap. The timeline didn't quite match up. If she was only 4 or 5 when this happened, it couldn't have been Clara. But the details, the way she spoke of the ring, the mysterious departure, it was too much to ignore. My mind raced with possibilities. Could Clara have given this woman the ring? Was it possible she had been connected to her in some way, however fleeting? "I was raised in foster care," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "The people who took me in didn't know much about where I came from. They told me I was found outside a hospital one night, just left there. No note, no explanation, just me, my clothes, and this ring." The ache in her voice was subtle, but it was there, buried beneath years of stoic acceptance. I watched as she twisted the ring again, her thumb brushing over the sapphire like it was a lifeline. I always wondered about that person, she admitted, her gaze distant. Why they left me, why they gave me this. It's silly, I guess, but part of me always hoped I'd find them one day, or at least understand why they left. Her words sliced through me like a knife. I couldn't ignore the parallels any longer. The timeline might have been imperfect, but everything else, her story, the ring, the sense of loss she carried, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. I don't think it's silly at all, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes the things we hold on to, like this ring, can lead us back to the answers we're looking for. She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine. There was something in her gaze, something vulnerable, almost fragile, but also resolute. Do you really think so? She asked. I do, I said firmly. I believe everything has a reason, even if we can't see it right away. The boy stirred beside her, tugging at her sleeve. Mommy, he said, his voice sleepy, can we go home now? She smiled down at him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. In a minute, sweetheart, she said, her voice tender. When she looked back at me, there was a flicker of hesitation in her expression. I don't even know why I'm telling you this, she admitted, almost to herself. I don't usually talk about it. Sometimes, it's easier to share with a stranger, I offered. She nodded faintly, but her gaze lingered on mine, and for a moment, I wondered if she sensed the depth of my investment. I wanted to ask her more, so much more, but I knew I couldn't push too hard, not yet. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small card. If you ever feel like talking more, I said, handing it to her, you can find me here. Sometimes, sharing a story can lead to unexpected places. She hesitated, but eventually took the card, her fingers brushing mine as she did. Thank you, she said softly. As she stood, gathering her son and her things, I watched her walk away, the ring still gleaming on her finger. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, but one thing was clear. This was no coincidence. This woman, this ring, her story. There was a connection to Clara. I was sure of it, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. The following days were a blur, my mind replaying every word, every gesture, every fleeting look from the woman on the bench. The image of the ring gleaming on her finger haunted me like a ghost. The more I thought about it, the more the ache in my chest deepened, a painful mix of hope and dread. Was it possible this woman knew something about Clara? Could her story hold the key to understanding what happened all those years ago? Driven by an urgency I hadn't felt in decades, I returned to the mall each day, no longer in my Santa suit, but blending into the sea of holiday shoppers. I lingered near the toy store where I'd first seen her, my heart racing each time a dark-haired woman passed by. It wasn't until the third day that I finally spotted her again. She was at the edge of the food court, her son perched on a high chair in front of her as he munched on a slice of pizza. She wore the same dark coat and scarf, her hair tucked behind her ears. For a moment, I stood frozen, my stomach twisting with nerves. What could I say to her now? How could I press further without pushing her away? But then, as if sensing my presence, she looked up. Her eyes met mine across the bustling food court, and recognition flickered in her expression. There was no fear or annoyance, just a quiet curiosity. She raised a hand in a small wave, inviting me over. I crossed the room, weaving through the crowd until I stood by their table. She smiled faintly, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. "We meet again," she said, her voice warm but slightly guarded. "Seems like fate," I replied with a small smile, taking the seat. Her son looked up at me, his face smeared with tomato sauce. "Hi, Santa," he exclaimed brightly, waving a tiny hand. I chuckled, leaning forward slightly. "Hello again, young man. I hope you've been good since we last met." The boy giggled, but his attention quickly returned to his pizza. I turned my focus back to the woman, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I began, my tone careful. "About the ring. About what you told me." Her fingers instinctively moved to the ring, twisting it on her finger. "I've been thinking about it too," she admitted. "It's not something I usually talk about. I don't even know why I told you so much. Sometimes it's easier to share with someone who's willing to listen," I offered. She nodded, her gaze dropping to her lap. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't really know where to start. My life has always felt fragmented, like pieces of a story that don't fit together." "What do you mean?" I asked gently. She hesitated, glancing at her son before continuing. "I grew up in foster care," she said. "I don't remember much from before that. Just flashes, faces, voices, little moments that don't make sense. The only thing that stayed with me is this ring." Her fingers brushed over the sapphire, her gaze distant. "I don't even know why she gave it to me. The woman who left me, she said it was important, that I should keep it safe. And then she was gone." My breath caught in my throat. "She?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. "I don't remember much about her, just that she had this sadness about her, like she was carrying something heavy. She knelt in front of me, put this ring on my finger, and told me to hold on to it. She said it was a part of her, something I could keep even when she wasn't there anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I remember crying, begging her not to leave, but she kissed my forehead and told me I'd understand someday. Then she walked away, and that was it." I stared at her, my mind racing. The timeline fit. The story fit. If Clara had given her this ring, if Clara had left her behind, it would explain so much. But it also opened 1,000 more questions. Why? Why would Clara leave her child? And what had happened to her after that? "Do you remember anything else about her?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She shook her head. "Not really. Just little things." Her voice. The way she smelled, like lavender and something sweet. She had long hair, dark like mine. And she cried when she said goodbye. I'll never forget that. Her words felt like a dagger to my chest. Lavender. It was Clara's favorite scent. I used to buy her lavender candles, lavender lotion, even lavender perfume when she was younger. Hearing it now, from this woman who might very well be her daughter, was almost too much to bear. "She didn't tell you why she had to leave?" I asked. "No," she said softly. "I've spent my whole life wondering, did something happen to her? Did she want to come back but couldn't? Or did she just not want me?" Her voice broke on the last word, and she quickly looked away, blinking back tears. "I don't believe that for a second," I said firmly. "If she left you that ring, it wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she wanted you to have something of hers, something to remind you of her." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with doubt and longing. "Do you really think so?" "I do," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "And I think she left it with you because she believed you were strong enough to hold on to it, to hold on to her, even when she couldn't be there." The boy tugged at her sleeve, breaking the moment. "Mommy, can I have a cookie now?" She smiled faintly, brushing a hand over his hair. "In a minute, sweetheart." When she looked back at me, her expression was softer, more vulnerable. I don't know why, but talking to you makes me feel like I'm closer to the truth. Like maybe there's a reason you found me. "I think there is," I said, my voice filled with quiet conviction. "And I'd like to help you find that truth, if you'll let me." She hesitated, but then she nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "but I don't even know where to start." "Let's start with what we both know," I said, "and we'll figure out the rest together." As she rose from the table, taking her son's hand, I felt a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. Somewhere, buried in the past, was the answer to all, and I wasn't going to stop until I found it. The days that followed were filled with a restless energy I hadn't felt in years. My encounter with the young woman, her story, and her connection to the ring had reignited something within me, a spark of hope, but also a gnawing uncertainty. Her words lingered in my mind, replaying themselves in a relentless loop. The woman who had given her the ring, the lavender scent, the tears. Could it really have been Clara? The possibility filled me with equal parts joy and dread. If Clara had survived, if she had lived long enough to leave behind a child, then where was she now? What had happened to her after that fateful day? And why had she felt the need to leave her daughter behind? I needed answers, and the young woman, whose name I learned was Evelyn, was my only link to finding them. We agreed to meet again a few days later at a quiet cafe tucked into a corner of the city. It was far from the noise and chaos of the mall, a place where we could talk without distractions. Evelyn arrived with her son in tow, the boy clutching a toy truck and chattering excitedly about the Christmas lights he'd seen on the way. She looked more composed this time, though there was a nervous energy about her, a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as she slid into the booth across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to come," I replied, my tone warm but serious. Her son climbed onto the seat beside her, engrossed in his toy, and for a moment we sat in silence. I watched as she adjusted her scarf, her fingers brushing against the ring again. It was a small gesture, almost unconscious, but it spoke volumes. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice soft but steady. "About your daughter, about the ring. It's hard to believe there could be a connection, but I don't know. Something about it feels right." "I feel the same way," I said. "There's too much for it to be a coincidence. The ring, the story you told me, it all lines up too perfectly." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. "I've always wondered about her, the woman who gave me this. I used to make up stories in my head about who she was, where she went. But no matter how many times I tried, I could never figure out why she left." Her voice cracked slightly, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "Part of me has always hated her for it, for leaving me alone, for making me feel like I wasn't enough to stay for. But another part of me just misses her, even though I barely knew her." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The pain in her voice, the longing, mirrored my own feelings about Clara's disappearance. For 20 years, I had wrestled with the same questions, the same ache. Why had she left? Was she still out there somewhere, thinking of me, missing me as much as I missed her? "I don't think she left you because she didn't care," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I think she left because she thought she had no other choice. And I think, if she could have, she would have stayed." Evelyn looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you really believe that?" "I do," I said firmly, "because the Clara I knew, the Clara who wore that ring, was kind and loving and fiercely protective of the people she cared about. She would have done anything to keep them safe." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe around us buzzed with quiet chatter and the clink of dishes, but it felt like we were in our own little world, bound together by a shared pain neither of us fully understood yet. "Do you think she could still be out there?" Evelyn asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe with every fiber of my being that Clara was alive, that she was somewhere out there, waiting to be found. But the years of silence, of unanswered questions, had left their mark. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "But if she is, I'll do everything in my power to find her." Evelyn nodded, her expression resolute. "Then I'll help you," she said. "If there's even a chance that she's out there, I want to know the truth." Her words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't searching alone. Evelyn's story, her connection to the ring, had given me a thread to follow, and together, we would unravel the mystery of what happened to Clara. As we left the cafe, walking out into the crisp winter air, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was closer to Clara now than I had been in 20 years, and I wouldn't stop until I found her. The following weeks were a whirlwind of questions, research, and emotional revelations. Evelyn and I had embarked on a journey neither of us had expected, piecing together fragments of her past in the hopes that they might lead us to Clara. It wasn't easy. Each step forward was met with doubt, every unanswered question looming like a storm cloud over our progress. But the hope of finding the truth, of uncovering what had happened to Clara, pushed us forward. Evelyn invited me to her apartment one chilly evening, a modest space filled with warmth and the unmistakable chaos of raising a young child. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, and a small artificial Christmas tree stood in the corner, its twinkling lights reflecting off the window. "Sorry about the mess," Evelyn said, scooping up a few stray cars and blocks as she gestured for me to sit on the couch. "It's perfect," I said with a smile, my eyes drifting to her son, who was busy constructing a tower of blocks in the corner. The boy looked up, grinned at me, and returned to his task. Evelyn sat across from me, holding a small shoebox in her hands. Her expression was serious, her fingers tracing the edges of the lid as though she were unsure whether to open it. "This is everything I have," she said finally, placing the box on the table between us. "Everything from before I went into foster care. It's not much, but maybe it'll help." I reached for the box slowly, almost reverently. Opening it felt like opening a time capsule, a window into the past that might hold the answers we were both searching for. Inside were a few photographs, their edges worn and faded, along with a small knitted blanket and a piece of folded paper. The photographs caught my attention first. There were only 3 of them, each one grainy and slightly blurred, but my heart skipped a beat as I picked them up. The first was of a young Evelyn, no older than 4, sitting on a park bench with a woman beside her. The woman's face was partially obscured, her head turned to the side, but there was something achingly familiar about her profile. "That's her," Evelyn said softly, leaning forward. "That's the woman who gave me the ring." I studied the photograph, my hands trembling. Her hair was long and dark, cascading over her shoulders, and though her face wasn't fully visible, I could see the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her hands rested protectively on Evelyn's small shoulders. "She looks so much like Clara," I murmured, the words catching in my throat. Evelyn's eyes widened. "You think it's her?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but it feels like it could be." The second photograph was even more intriguing. It showed the same woman, standing alone near a hospital entrance, her expression somber. She held the small knitted blanket in her hands, the same one now folded neatly in the shoebox. There was a date stamped in the corner of the photo, December 19th, 2004. "That's the hospital where I was found," Evelyn said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I've always wondered why she was there, why she left me there." My mind raced. If this was Clara, and I was almost certain it was, then this photograph might hold the key to understanding what had happened. The date placed it nearly a year after she disappeared. For a fleeting moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. She had been alive. She had been out there. The last photograph was the most mysterious of all. It was a close-up of the ring, its sapphire stone catching the light. The angle suggested it had been taken in a hurry, perhaps as a way to preserve its image before it was passed on. There were no people in the shot, just the ring, placed on a worn wooden surface. Evelyn reached for the folded piece of paper, her fingers trembling as she opened it. "This came with me, too," she said, handing it to me. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting faint but legible. My eyes scanned the words, my breath catching as I read. "Evelyn, I love you more than anything in this world. Please know that what I'm doing is to protect you. Keep this ring close. It's a part of me, and I'll always be with you. I hope one day you'll understand. Love always, Mom." Tears blurred my vision as I read the letter again, the words hitting me like a tidal wave. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Clara's. "It's her?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's Clara." Evelyn stared at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and hope. "Are you sure?" "I'd recognize her handwriting anywhere," I said, holding up the letter. "This is from her. She's your mother." Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of the revelation settling over us like a heavy blanket. "She was trying to protect you," I said finally, my voice shaking. She didn't leave because she didn't care. She left because she thought it was the only way to keep you safe. But why? Evelyn asked, her voice breaking. What was she protecting me from? I don't know, I admitted, but we're going to find out. The photographs, the letter, the ring, they were pieces of a puzzle that was finally beginning to take shape. Clara's story was far from over, and though the answers we had found raised even more questions, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in 20 years, I was closer to Clara than I had ever been. The discovery of Clara's letter turned the tide of our search. It was no longer just a possibility or a hunch. It was the truth, written in her own hand. Clara had been alive after her disappearance, long enough to leave Evelyn at the hospital and write the letter that now felt like a lifeline between past and present. But the letter, as profound as it was, left us with more questions than answers. What had Clara been running from? Why had she thought abandoning her child was the only way to protect her? And most painfully of all, where was she now? Evelyn and I spent the next several days going through every detail we had, trying to piece together the story. The photographs, the blanket, the ring, and the letter. They were clues, fragments of a larger puzzle we were determined to solve. But the picture they painted was still incomplete, and every theory we formed seemed to raise more doubts than clarity. One evening, as the snow fell softly outside Evelyn's apartment, she spread the photographs across her coffee table, her brow furrowed in concentration. The boy was asleep in his room, and the quiet of the night gave us space to think. We know she was alive in December 2004, Evelyn said, pointing to the date on the photograph of the hospital. And we know she left me there. But what about before that? Where was she for the year after she disappeared? And why did she end up at that hospital? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the photograph of Clara with Evelyn as a child. The way she had held Evelyn in that picture, the protective grip, the tenderness in her posture, it spoke volumes. Clara hadn't abandoned her daughter easily. She had been forced to make an impossible choice. Something must have happened to her, I said slowly. Something that made her believe she couldn't keep you safe herself. But what? Evelyn sighed, running a hand through her hair. I've always wondered if it was something dangerous. Maybe someone was after her. Her words sent a chill down my spine. The idea that Clara had been in danger, that she might have been running from something or someone, felt disturbingly plausible. But who and why? Have you ever tried looking into your birth records? I asked. Evelyn shook her head. There wasn't much to find. The hospital didn't have any information on her. They said she left before anyone could ask her questions. My birth certificate only lists my first name, Evelyn, and no last name. Everything else is blank. Then maybe we need to start there, I suggested. The hospital might have records they didn't share with you before. And if Clara left any trace of herself there, we need to find it. Evelyn hesitated, her gaze flicking to the photographs on the table. Do you really think we'll find something? I do, I said firmly. If Clara was there, then there has to be a record of her. Even if it's just a footprint, it's a step closer to the truth. The next morning, we made our way to the hospital. It was a large, imposing building, its brick facade softened by a blanket of snow. Inside, the air was warm but sterile, the hum of machinery, and the quiet bustle of nurses creating an atmosphere of subdued urgency. Evelyn approached the receptionist, her voice steady despite the nervous energy radiating from her. I was brought here as a child in December 2004, she said. I'd like to see if there are any records from that time. The receptionist glanced at her, then at me, before typing something into her computer. You'll need to fill out a request form, she said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. As Evelyn filled out the form, I couldn't help but glance around, my heart racing with anticipation. This was the place where Clara had last been seen. Somewhere within these walls, there might be a clue, a thread that would lead us to the answers we so desperately sought. We submitted the form and waited in a small seating area, the minutes dragging by like hours. Finally, a nurse approached us, a folder in her hands. We don't have much, she said, her tone apologetic. But we did find something from that date. A woman dropped off a child here on December 19th, 2004. She didn't give her name, but she filled out a basic intake form before leaving. She handed the folder to Evelyn, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, but still legible. At the top, the word Evelyn was written in bold, careful letters. Below it, the rest of the form was sparsely filled out. No last name, no date of birth, no parental information. But in the box marked guardian signature, there was a single name scrawled in faint ink, Clara Matthews. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I stared at the name, my heart pounding. It was real. It was her. She used her real name, Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. She was here. The nurse gave us a sympathetic look. I wish we had more information, she said, but this is all we were able to find. Thank you, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. As we left the hospital, the gravity of the discovery began to sink in. Clara had been alive, had been here, had left her name behind as a quiet echo of her presence. But the question remained, where had she gone after that? She wanted me to know, Evelyn said softly as we walked through the snow. She signed her name so I would know she was my mother. And now we do, I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. We're closer to her than we've ever been. We'll find her, Evelyn. I promise. But as I said the words, a part of me couldn't ignore the fear that lingered in the back of my mind. What if we were too late? What if the truth we uncovered wasn't the one we hoped for? For now, though, we had a name, a signature, a new piece of the puzzle. And that was enough to keep us going. The days following our visit to the hospital were a blur of frantic research and sleepless nights. The discovery of Clara's signature on Evelyn's intake form had reignited my hope, but it also unleashed a torrent of questions. Where had Clara gone after leaving the hospital? Had she stayed in the area, watching from the shadows? Or had she disappeared into the void once again, leaving behind nothing but her name? Evelyn was just as consumed by the search as I was. Every evening after putting her son to bed, we would sit at her dining table, poring over old directories, public records, and missing persons reports. I contacted everyone I could think of, old colleagues, friends, even private investigators who had worked on Clara's case years ago. Each lead felt like a faint whisper, a breadcrumb that might lead us closer to her. But the trail was cold, frustratingly so. Then, one evening, a breakthrough came. Evelyn had been digging through an online database of archived local newspapers when she stumbled upon a name, Clara Matthews. The article was dated 3 years after Evelyn had been left at the hospital. It mentioned a woman matching Clara's description who had been seen volunteering at a shelter for women and children in a nearby city. My heart leapt at the possibility. If Clara had been working at a shelter, it meant she might have stayed in the area, helping others while keeping herself hidden. This could be it, Evelyn said, her voice trembling with excitement. She might still be there, or at least someone there might remember her. The next morning, we set out for the shelter. It was a modest brick building nestled in a quiet neighborhood, its windows adorned with cheerful holiday decorations. A small sign out front read, Haven House, a safe place for women and families. Evelyn and I exchanged a nervous glance before stepping inside. The lobby was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of coffee and the quiet hum of conversation. A woman at the reception desk greeted us with a kind smile. "Welcome to Haven House," she said. "How can I help you?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "We're looking for someone who might have volunteered here," I said. "Her name is Clara Matthews." The woman's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of cautious curiosity. "Clara Matthews," she repeated, as though testing the name. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." My pulse quickened. "So, she was here?" The woman nodded. "Yes, she volunteered here years ago. Must have been close to 15 years now. She was wonderful, always so kind and compassionate. The women here adored her." "Do you know what happened to her?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "Where she went?" The woman's expression softened. "I'm afraid I don't. One day, she just stopped coming. No explanation, no goodbye. We tried to reach her, but it was like she vanished. It was heartbreaking. I felt the air leave my lungs, the familiar sting of disappointment settling in my chest. Another dead end, another ghost of Clara, fading before I could reach her. But, the woman added, her tone brightening, there might be someone here who remembers more. Let me see if I can find her. She disappeared down a hallway, leaving us in a tense silence. Evelyn sat beside me, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. What if this doesn't lead anywhere? She whispered. It will, I said, though my own doubts lingered. We've come too far for it not to. A few minutes later, the receptionist returned with an older woman in tow. Her hair was silver, her face lined with years of wisdom, but her eyes were sharp and full of curiosity. Mrs. Garrison, the receptionist said, these people are looking for Clara Matthews. I thought you might be able to help. Mrs. Garrison's expression softened at the mention of Clara's name. Clara, she said, her voice warm with nostalgia. I remember her well. Such a kind soul. She helped me when I first started here. Do you know what happened to her? Evelyn asked, leaning forward. Mrs. Garrison hesitated, her gaze flicking between us. I do, she said finally. Or at least, I think I do. Clara left because she was being followed. She didn't tell me much, just that she was afraid someone might find her here. She said she had to leave to protect the people she cared about. The words hit me like a hammer. Being followed, protecting the people she cared about. It was the same fear that had driven her to leave Evelyn at the hospital, the same fear that had likely kept her running for years. Do you know where she went? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Garrison nodded slowly. She told me she was going north, to a small town called Briarwood. She said she heard it was quiet, a good place to disappear. The name lit a spark of recognition in my mind. Briarwood. It was a tiny town tucked into the mountains, a place Clara had always spoken of fondly. She had visited it once as a child with her grandparents and had described it as a fairy tale come to life. Thank you, I said, my heart racing. Thank you so much. As we left the shelter, Evelyn turned to me, her eyes wide with hope. Do you think she's still there? I don't know, I admitted. But if she is, we're going to find her. The drive to Briarwood was long and winding, the snow-covered mountains rising like silent sentinels around us. With each mile, my anticipation grew, the thought of seeing Clara again filling me with equal parts joy and fear. When we finally arrived, the town was exactly as Clara had described it all those years ago, quaint and picturesque, its streets lined with snow-dusted trees and glowing holiday lights. This is it, I said, my voice thick with emotion. This is where she might be. Evelyn nodded, her expression determined. Let's find her. The town of Briarwood looked like something out of a snow globe. Its streets were lined with charming brick buildings adorned with twinkling Christmas lights, their reflections shimmering in the snow that blanketed the ground. A large evergreen stood in the town square, decorated with ornaments and glowing stars, while cheerful carols played faintly in the background. Evelyn and I stood at the edge of the square, the stillness between us heavy with anticipation. Do you think she's really here? Evelyn asked softly, her breath forming a mist in the frosty air. I looked around, my heart racing as memories of Clara's childhood stories flooded my mind. Briarwood had always been her dream escape, a place she described as peaceful and safe. If she had truly come here, it was because she had been searching for refuge. She loved this town, I said, my voice trembling. If she's anywhere, it might be here. Evelyn nodded, clutching her coat tighter around her. So, where do we start? I scanned the small town square, my eyes catching on a cozy cafe with soft yellow lights spilling from its windows. A handful of people sat inside, their faces illuminated by the warm glow. It seemed as good a place as any to begin. We pushed open the door, a bell jingling softly as we entered. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods enveloped us, a comforting contrast to the chill outside. A woman behind the counter looked up, smiling warmly. Welcome. What can I get for you? I hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. Actually, we're looking for someone. Her name is Clara Matthews. Have you heard of her?" The woman's smile faltered, her brow furrowing in thought. "Clara Matthews," she repeated, as if testing the name. "I think I might know who you mean. There's a Clara who comes in here sometimes, but I don't know her last name. She lives just outside of town, in a cabin near Briarwood Lake." My heart leapt. A cabin. It sounded like exactly the kind of place Clara would choose. Quiet, secluded, surrounded by nature. "Can you tell us how to get there?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling with urgency. The woman nodded, scribbling directions on a napkin and handing it to us. "It's a bit of a drive, but you can't miss it. Just follow the road around the lake until you see the mailbox with a bluebird painted on it. That's hers." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. As we left the cafe, the weight of the moment began to settle over me. This was it. After 20 long years, I was on the verge of finding Clara. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, following the winding road around the frozen lake. The trees loomed tall on either side, their branches heavy with snow, and the only sound was the crunch of tires on the icy path. Evelyn sat beside me, silent but tense. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I could feel her nerves, her longing, her fear mirroring my own. Finally, the mailbox came into view. It was simple, weathered by time, but the bluebird painted on its side was bright and vivid, a small beacon in the snowy landscape. Beyond it, a narrow driveway led to a cabin nestled among the trees. "There it is," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We parked at the edge of the driveway, the car engine falling silent as we sat in the stillness. The cabin was small but inviting, smoke curling from the chimney and soft light glowing from the windows. My chest tightened as I stared at the front door, imagining Clara on the other side. Evelyn placed a hand on my arm, her eyes wide with emotion. "Are you ready?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was. How do you prepare for a moment like this? A moment you've dreamed of and dreaded for 2 decades. We stepped out of the car, the snow crunching beneath our boots as we approached the cabin. My heart pounded with each step, and when we finally reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knocker. "What if she doesn't want to see us?" Evelyn asked quietly. "She will," I said, though my voice wavered. "She has to." I knocked. The sound echoed through the stillness, and for a moment, there was nothing. Then, footsteps approached from inside, each one sending a jolt through my chest. The door creaked open, and there she was, Clara. She looked older, her face lined with the passage of time, but there was no mistaking her. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes, those same brilliant blue eyes, widened in shock as she took us in. For a moment, none of us spoke. Clara's hand trembled on the edge of the door, her gaze flicking between me and Evelyn. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. "Clara," I whispered, my voice breaking. Her eyes filled with tears, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dad." The sound of her voice, fragile, disbelieving, was enough to shatter the walls I had built around my grief. Tears blurred my vision as I stepped forward, my arms reaching for her. "It's me," I said, my voice trembling. "It's really me?" She hesitated for only a second before falling into my embrace, her sobs muffled against my shoulder. I held her tightly, the years of separation melting away in an instant. "I thought I'd never see you again," she choked out, her voice heavy with emotion. "Neither did I admitted, my tears soaking into her hair. "But I never stopped looking for you. Never." Evelyn stood a few steps behind me, her face pale and her eyes wide. Clara pulled back slightly, her gaze shifting to her. "Evelyn," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's me, your daughter." Clara's hand flew to her mouth again, her entire body shaking as she stared at Evelyn. Slowly, Evelyn stepped forward, and Clara reached for her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "My baby," Clara sobbed, her voice breaking. My sweet Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Evelyn clung to her, tears spilling down her face. I thought you didn't want me, she said, her voice cracking. But you did, didn't you? More than anything, Clara said, her voice raw with emotion. I left because I had to, because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. But I never stopped loving you. Never. The three of us stood there, tangled in an embrace that felt like both an ending and a beginning. After 20 years, the distance between us had finally closed. The cabin was warm, the glow from the fireplace casting a soft light on the wooden walls as we sat together. The air was thick with emotions, relief, grief, love, all tumbling over one another as we pieced together the fractured years. Clara had brewed tea, her hands shaking slightly as she set the steaming mugs on the small table between us. Evelyn and I sat side by side on the worn couch, her son asleep in Clara's bedroom after a long, emotional day. For the first time in 20 years, we were a family again. I don't even know where to start, Clara said, her voice quiet but steady. She sat across from us in an armchair, her hands clasped tightly around her mug. There's so much I want to say, so much I need to explain. Start wherever feels right, I said gently. She nodded, taking a deep breath. After I left home, I didn't mean for it to be forever, she began, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But things got complicated. I got involved with someone I thought I could trust, but they turned out to be dangerous, controlling. By the time I realized what I'd gotten into, it was too late. She looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. When I found out I was pregnant with Evelyn, I knew I had to get away. I couldn't let her grow up in that environment. I couldn't let her be hurt. Evelyn reached for her, placing a comforting hand on her knee. You were trying to protect me, she said softly. Clara nodded, her tears spilling over. I left him while I was pregnant. I ran as far as I could, but I knew he'd never stop looking for me. For us. After you were born, Evelyn, I tried to keep us together. I tried so hard, but everywhere we went, I felt like he was right behind us. I couldn't let him find you. I couldn't let him take you away. She paused, her voice breaking as she wiped her tears. Leaving you at that hospital was the hardest thing I've ever done. I hated myself for it, but I thought if I left you somewhere safe, somewhere he couldn't find you, you'd have a chance. A chance at a better life. Evelyn's own tears were falling freely now. I grew up wondering why you left, she said. I thought it was because you didn't want me. But hearing this, I know now that you did, that you loved me enough to let me go. Clara leaned forward, taking Evelyn's hands in hers. I loved you more than anything, she said fiercely. And I never stopped. Not for 1 second. I watched them, my heart aching with both sorrow and joy. Clara had been through so much, yet her love for Evelyn had endured through it all. What happened after you left the hospital? I asked, my voice gentle. Clara sighed, leaning back in her chair. I stayed on the run for years, moving from place to place, always looking over my shoulder. I volunteered at shelters when I could, trying to give back in some small way. But I never stopped thinking about Evelyn. I never stopped wondering if she was okay. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with remorse. And I never stopped thinking about you, Dad. I wanted to come home so many times, but I was afraid that I'd bring danger with me, that he'd find me and hurt you. Too. Tears stung my eyes as I reached for her hand. Clara, I said, my voice thick with emotion, I would have done anything to protect you, to protect both of you. I wish you'd come to me. I know, she said, her voice breaking. And I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, but looking back, I see how much I hurt you, how much I hurt Evelyn. I can never make up for that. You don't have to, I said firmly. You're here now. That's all that matters. Evelyn nodded, squeezing Clara's hand. We found each other. That's what counts. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past giving way to the quiet peace of the present. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in a soft, forgiving hush. As the fire crackled in the hearth, I glanced at the small Christmas tree Clara had set up in the corner of the room. It was decorated with handmade ornaments and twinkling lights, a symbol of the season's enduring magic. "This feels like a miracle," I said, my voice filled with wonder. "After all these years, after everything we've been through, we're together again. That's the greatest gift I could ever ask for." Clara smiled through her tears, her face glowing with a mixture of relief and joy. "It is a miracle," she said. "I didn't think I'd ever get to see you again. Either of you." Evelyn leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand still clasped in Clara's. "Maybe that's what Christmas is really about," she said softly. "Finding your way back to the people you love, no matter how far you've gone." I looked at them both, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Christmas has always been about hope," I said. "And tonight, I finally feel like that hope has been realized." As we sat there, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the love we had fought so hard to reclaim, I knew that this Christmas would be one I'd never forget. The pain of the past would never fully fade, but it no longer defined us. We were a family again, stronger for the journey that had brought us back to each other. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the snowy landscape, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was the true meaning of Christmas. Not the presents or the decorations, but the love that endures, the forgiveness that heals, and the hope that lights even the darkest of nights.